Hey, what's going on YouTube? Alabama Reloader here. Coming at you. Got a couple of things to cover in this video. Pretty much the bulk of it is going to be pertaining to uh, the brass, the Lapua brass here. This is the, get in nice and close. So I picked this up over at Mr. Big Guns in Huntsville. That's primarily where I get a lot of my reloading stuff. I love shopping down there, hanging out with Matt and the guys. But he started to get in a lot of Lapua product, or Lapua, however you pronounce it. Well, I think if you hear the people actually say it, I believe it's Lapua. But whatever. I'm from Alabama. We call it Lapua. But he's got, he's recently started carrying a ton of the brass. So he's got the 6.5 Creedmoor. I think he has 260 Remington, 6.5 Grendel, 308, 223, 22 250. He's got a bunch of the brass. He's starting to carry more projectiles from Lapua. So good stuff there. And, you know, the Starlight brass that I have been using, I don't have any sitting around now. I think it's all loaded up and or shot and or somewhere not in here. That stuff's worked great, but I've developed, you know, really good loads using that brass. And so I want to just kind of keep those separate as hunting loads. Since I've already worked those up, we're just going to leave those as is. We're not really going to fool with those. It was 50 pieces. I don't even know what firing they're on now. They've had several firings on them. And so I was basically in the market for some new brass and decided to go ahead and pick up some of this stuff. So yeah, it's the 6.5 Creedmoor small rifle primer pocket, okay? But also it is the small flash hole. So the undersized flash hole version of that brass. All right. So there you go. So it's a small rifle primer and then also undersized flash hole. That will create a problem, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the video primarily is about this brass, okay, which represents your high end, extremely high end, very expensive, you know, basically $1 a piece, versus not so high end brass. Okay, so basically this video is a comparison between the two. Lapua, Federal Premium. I didn't capture all this data when I had when I ordered my Starline brass. I kind of wish I would have now, and then the Hornady brass that I've used in the past also. I kind of wish I would have taken some of these measurements, but I didn't. So we've got a couple of different brands here to evaluate and look at. But I went ahead. The Lapua is 100 pieces. They actually sent 101, so good job to them. The Federal Premium is 50 pieces, and they sent 50. So one major note difference, this is large rifle primer brass and your standard flash hole. So that's really the biggest difference there. But what I did, I went through, and now to keep things kind of consistent, I guess, when it came to, I measured the weight of each piece of brass, and then I also measured the overall length of each piece of brass. On the overall length, I kept it at just 50 pieces for the Lapua, so that way it would be, you know, more, I guess, evenly matched on the length side. On the weight, I did go ahead and weigh 100 pieces. I kept one piece out, and you'll know why in a little bit. But I just weighed 100 pieces, weighed all 100 pieces. And then on the Federal, you know, obviously I just weighed the 50 since that's all I had. So, yeah, so let's get to, I brought the laptop in. Let's get to the results. This kind of looks like a bunch of garbage basically on the screen. But pretty much what I did, I've got my Lapua brass weight and length here. And then my Federal brass weight and length here. I've got our min max, the spread between the two, the average weight, and then standard deviation. So that's kind of what these numbers represent here. So we'll just start with the Lapua brass. And by the way, if you didn't know or whatever, just even before we dive into this, yes, Lapua was more consistent. I mean, I'll go ahead and it shouldn't come as a surprise. But what was surprising was the Federal brass. It wasn't terrible. You know, it definitely, not saying Federal brass is terrible by any means. It's just, I thought it performed really well. I thought all the measurements and stuff checked out, in my opinion, for what I do, for the type of shooting I do and type of reloading I do. The Federal brass is more than adequate in terms of the consistency. So, but just, we'll start with the Lapua. The weight was impressive. There's only 1.1 grain difference in the weight. The men, 163.9, max 165. So your average was 164.45, and I saw that quite frequently. That was probably the bulk of what I measured. Was around that 164.4, 0.5 range. Extremely low standard deviation on the weight, and then length. Length was extremely impressive, only 4 thousandths. So you can see that there, only 4 thousandths difference between the min and max. Average was 1.911. The trim length, your max length is 1.920, and so you want to trim it back to 1.910. So you're right there, basically at the SAMI trim length, minimum length that you want to trim back to, 1.911. That's average, but obviously really low standard deviation there, only 4 thousandths difference. So Federal brass, if I can hold my phone still, it is heavier, slightly heavier. The average, it's about 5.5 grains heavier on average. This one was 170, whereas if you go back, the Lapua was 164, so about 5.5 grains heavier. You see the min max there. The spread was only 2 grains. Lapua was 1.1, the Federal was 2. Now, the Lapua brass, it was 100 pieces. This is only 50. So if I would have bought 2 bags, I don't know. That might grow. Who knows? Whatever. I only bought 1 bag, so there you go. 50 pieces versus 100. You take it for what it's worth. And then the length, there was 9 thousandths difference on the length. So that, if there was anything disappointing about the Federal brass, it would have been that. They had several pieces that were under the, sort of the SAMI minimum length or recommended trim length of 1.910. They had several pieces under that. You see the min there, 1.907. And then, of course, the average was the same as the Lapua at 1.911. But again, you had that 9 thousandths of spread. So standard deviation wasn't as tight. And that was just across the board on weight and length. It wasn't as tight as the Lapua. But it shouldn't really come as a surprise. So there you go. That's the comparison. So if you feel like you want to spend the extra cash and go ahead and buy you a box of these, hey, by all means, have at it. If you're definitely, if you're shooting matches and things like that, I mean, obviously the consistency from piece to piece is what you're going to be looking for on these. I mean, a grain, 1.1 grain difference over the course of 100 pieces. I mean, I don't even think you'd weight sort at that point. I mean, it's so consistent. So, you may sort by case volume and all that, but in terms of just sheer weight of the case, that's why you pay the premium. I mean, you just grab and go, and the consistency is there. Overall length was very consistent, only 4 thousandths difference. So that was really good to see. The Federal weight was fairly, where are they at? Federal, what do I do with the Federal pieces? Oh, I'll put them back in the bag. Come on now, focus. But the Federal pieces, I mean, they were consistent as well on weight. The overall length, you know, that's where you go from, you know, $1 a piece down to whatever this stuff costs, 32 bucks for 50. So times that by 2. So you're looking at 60 cents a piece, a little more than that, 60 cents a piece. But again, if I'm paying 60 cents a piece, I would like to see that a little bit tighter on the overall length. You know, you had some pieces in there that were creeping up, you know, getting close to that trim length right off the bat, you know, factory, you know, from the factory, they're getting close to the recommended trim length, or recommended max length, and then you need to trim them. So whereas you have some others that are on the low end where they're not even, you know, they ain't even made it to 1.910 yet. So that part, you know, I wouldn't be too thrilled about buying a bag of brass and possibly having to trim all the brass right off the bat as one of the first things I did if I was looking for consistency. But you may enjoy doing that. I don't know, whatever. You might want to trim everything the moment you get it, brand new, who knows. But just saying, in this experience, limited sample size, 1 box of the Lapua, you'd be ready to rock and roll. So I thought that was pretty cool. Pretty neat little comparison there. But still really good performance out of this stuff. So if you don't want to spend the money on that stuff, this stuff, for what I do, should work perfectly. I mean, for the shooting that I do, I don't compete, I hunt, and I like to shoot. I say long distance. The furthest I've ever shot is 450 yards. Trust me, that would do more than fine for what I need to do. Now, where things got a little squirrely, but since I intend to use this brass for some low development, you know, in the 6.5 Creedmoor, my issue was on my Lee collet die. So if you remember, it's this guy. I've got it broken apart. But my Lee collet die, this decapping rod has a standard, or mandrel. This is the mandrel in the collet die. The little decapping rod here, okay, is sized for a standard flash hole. It is not and will not fit the undersized flash hole brass. Okay, you can go watch Johnny's Reloading Bench. I believe he did it in 308. I think he bought a box of 100 for the Lapua, and he actually punched out 50 pieces and enlarged the flash holes by not realizing that his decapping pin was not the right size for the flash hole. So, which, I mean, I think he went on to show that it doesn't really ruin the brass. It still performs fine. I mean, it's not going to be an issue. But I didn't want to do that. There's no point in purchasing undersized flash hole brass to then turn around and just punch out the flash hole to a standard size. Then why spend the money in the first place on the undersized flash hole? So, whatever. But I'm sitting here with a collet die that I can't use now. So, what's cool about you know, heading over to Mr. Big Guns in Huntsville, there's a shop, a gunsmith shop, literally next door. It's about 10 feet from the door of Mr. Big Guns. You just go over there. It's called the AR Bar Armory. Really cool place. Carl, the guy that owns it, super great guy to deal with. He's actually the guy that built my 300 Blackout, did an amazing job. And so I was sitting there thinking, you know, I didn't want to send this off to Lee and have them undersize it or anything. I didn't want to purchase an undersized flash hole or undersized decapping rod and all this, whatever. I was like, maybe I can run it to him and he can just modify the thing, would be my best bet. So that way I'm not having to swap out dies or swap out decapping rods. I don't want to have to fool with it. I just want this modified so I can use it no matter what brass I run through there, and I'm good to go. No matter what 6.5 brass I run through there, and I'm good to go. So took it to him, and in a couple of days, he shot me a text and said, hey, man, your decapping rod is ready to go. So pretty much, you can see that little step. Well, maybe if I can get to focus, there's like a little step right there. You hear that? So what he did, he went on and went in and undersized my decapping pin here portion. Undersized that to where now it fits perfectly in the brass. So now it fits the undersized flash hole. That's why I kept this piece out, because I gave it to him, gave him the mandrel and the piece of brass. I said, hey, I need this stuff. It says on the box it's 59 thousandths. I need it to fit. No problem, and roll with it. I'm in no rush to get it back. It was like 2 days, and he shot me a text, said, hey man, it's ready, come pick it up. And this thing works great, no issues whatsoever. So I couldn't be happier. Glad I didn't have to send it off and wait and all that. It's just run it down to Carl at the AR Bar Armory. They're on Facebook. I believe they're on Instagram. So yeah, just really, really great folks right there next to Mr. Big Guns. So it's a perfect combination of the two. You go in Mr. Big Guns, you buy all the AR parts you need for your build. You walk right next door, say, here you go, Carl. Can you just throw this thing together? Appreciate it. Have a good day. Or really any service you need, from what I understand. I mean, I didn't know if he could even do this, and I just ran it down there and was hoping he could, and he knocked it out of the park. So great job there. I really appreciate those guys being so quick on getting that back to me. That was a huge help. So yeah, that's it. That's the comparison between some Lapua and some Federal Premium. Federal Premium be perfectly acceptable for what I do. Match type stuff, you may want to look at something like the Lapua. The consistency is definitely there. It shows. That's why they charge the price that they do. But yeah, so if you need any firearms related work done, or crap, now I guess any reloading modification done to anything you own, go hit up the AR Bar Armory. Again, they're on Facebook, I believe, Instagram. Just look them up, and they're right next door to Mr. Big Guns in Huntsville. So it's, like I said, good combination. You buy everything you need over there, and then just run next door and have Carl build it for you. So that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm going to be working on some load development for this stuff, so stay tuned. I've already got it all primed. Now we just got to dump some powder bullet, and we'll walk through that at a later date. But that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll catch y'all next time.